Thanks for joining us today on Envision, where we're talking about the Sioux Falls School District facilities. We have 35 facilities across the district where we have school going on. We are thankful to be a very growing district where we continue to see growth, about 200 to 500 students every year. It's a good problem to have. But now we're starting to talk about where are we going to educate all of those students coming up.
You've heard me, and maybe the viewers have heard me too, call this is our delightful challenge.
Right.
Delightful because we're growing and we're filling up the facilities that we have. And so what do we continue to do? If we grow by another 200 students this year or 500 students next year, what do? We're growing up and our buildings are full. So how do we address that delightful challenge as we go forward?
Right, and you have a team of people that has sort of set a timeline for the next year or so about some of those critical pieces that need to be discussed to get us to the point where we can figure out, okay, what are some ideas in terms of facilities for the future?
We've really put together a comprehensive plan over this next year so that a year from now, maybe in August or September of 2018, we have a definite plan. Right now we have a plan to plan. and really, if I break that down into its simplest form, I would say this first semester, it's a lot of folks who work for the district putting pieces of this puzzle together. What does our enrollment look like? What does our projections for enrollment into the future look like? How many of our buildings are at capacity today? How much space do we actually have available yet to grow? Are we over capacity in some of our buildings right now? And just look at a lot of those questions. Another thing to look at there that isn't enrollment related is, what is the shape of the facilities that we have right now? Do they need upgraded? Do they need replaced? And today those are just questions that need answered. So we'll spend really these next 4 months or so putting together some information for our board in December for them to look at and review. Hopefully then in January, we're going to bring in somebody to help us work through this process. And that'll be somebody who has some expert in design or building, a contractor, an architect, somebody who can help us with this planning process and figuring out how much money are we looking at depending upon which way we go. And those sorts of things. Also in that second semester then we'll bring in some community folks and say, what makes sense? What does the community have an appetite for?
Sure.
What makes sense in terms of school size? How big do we want our schools to be? Those sorts of questions. And I see maybe February, March, putting together a group of 25 or so people who can give us that cross-section of ideas from throughout our community, and then take those ideas ultimately out to the full community. Right. And let everybody weigh in on 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 options, whatever that magic number is, and say, what do you think? And then hopefully once we've heard all that, once the board has heard all that information, by the time we get to next July, maybe our board begins to put together a scope of projects for years to come. Sure. And I really think that scope will be large enough financially that it won't be something that we can finance with our regular revenue streams that we have in the school district. Rather, I think it'll be something that our community will need to look at and either pass or not pass via a bond issue. Now that's all speculation from the superintendent at this point. No action has been taken by the board, but that's how I see things laying out this next year, so that ultimately we get a plan for what our facilities need to look like in the future, and we get a plan for how we're going to pay for those facilities in the future.
Right. We really have wonderful school buildings that have been built well, maintained extremely well. So in terms of that, we're sitting pretty good in terms of that sort of construction and longevity and that type of thing, but we're really looking at that growth and the continued, and I've heard you say kindergarten through 3rd grade has a surplus of students compared to our existing 9th through 12th grade.
When we look right now at the number of seats we have for high school students, so that's and we can count those up, we know that number. when we count the seats at Roosevelt and at Washington and at Lincoln and at New Tech and at CTE and at Joe Foss, all those seats where our 9th through 12th graders sit. And we think about those 4 grades, 9 through 12, and I compare that number to our first 4 grades, kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd from last year. Our kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd graders outnumbered last year's 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders by 1,100. So if last year we had 1,100 students to put in our facilities, where would they have gone? I don't know that we would like the answer to that question. The good news is we didn't have that dilemma last year,
Right.
but we're going to have that dilemma here in about 8 or 9 years.
Right.
So in the meantime, how do we make sure that we're ready for that?
Well, lots to discuss and a lot of information to put together over the next year or so that we can bring that to the community and have them weigh in as well. So be watching for more information on facilities. It will be a topic of discussion many times throughout the year. Thanks for joining us today on Envision.